Down to the wire at COP24. Climate talks going on in Poland for the last 2 weeks as world leaders come together to find ways to implement the Paris Accord of 2015 to try to prevent global warming from exceeding 1.5 to 2 degrees by the year 2030. Making good on the promises made in Paris. Fighting climate change, of course, is all about protecting the planet for future generations. So we wanted to hear from members of that generation. 2 recent grads from British Columbia who are in Poland for the COP24 talks. I'm going to introduce you to them now. On the right of your screen, you're going to see Colton Kasteel. Good morning. Colton from UBC, recent grad. Hi, Colton. And Alice Guo just got her master's from the London School of Economics, also from BC. Good to see you, Alice. Nice to have you as part of our show, too. Let me begin by asking you, Colton, why did you want to be there as a youth delegate? Why was it important for you to attend this? And what did you hope to contribute by being there personally, Colton?
Yeah, I mean, so this is my second year at COP, and it's really important to me, as well as to Alice and a number of our youth on our delegation, to have active youth engagement, both with other countries, but also with our Canadian ministers who attend this conference. And to make sure that they know that we're looking for some really ambitious action on climate.
Alice, for you, so you've been there for the full 2 weeks. Alice, you've been there for a week. And what have you learned over that week? What's been the most significant thing that you have observed and learned from your week being there?
I think one of the biggest things is just witnessing the entire world come together to try to push through something that is as complicated as the Paris Agreement. And I think I've learned that there's a lot more nuances to actually putting together the agreement and coming to consensus, and that there's a lot of different interests in mind. And so it's quite a challenging process. And that's kind of my takeaway.
I shouldn't chuckle because it's not funny, but you're right. I mean, we have seen this play out over and over again, the difference of bringing everybody to the table and finding something to agree on. What they're trying to agree on at COP24 is what's called the rule book, which are the actual rules written down, agreed to, the guidelines to make sure that countries do, in fact, meet the promises that they made in Paris. And it's not, at this point, a done deal. As you watch that, Colton, that they can't come to an agreement on something as important as this, is it frustrating as a young person, or how do you view it?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest with you. Of course, it's certainly frustrating. But I do remain hopeful. These conferences always tend to go over time, so there's lots of talk that it will probably end on Sunday. With that in mind, I mean, there's lots of politics at play, and the hope is that Canada can continue to play a really active role, as the minister already has so far, to make sure that we reach a really robust rulebook. And I remain optimistic. And
for you, Alice, this rulebook, why is it important, do you think?
It sets the norms and the standards in which the hundreds and hundreds of countries will come together and implement what was agreed in 2015. It kind of sets the benchmark in which everything else, all the programs, all the policies, leverage off. And so in order to activate or advocate for a very robust and ambitious rulebook, you're starting off at a much better place for more climate action. And so this rulebook is quite important as determining your starting place in this world.
Okay. When you're there as a youth delegate, are you actually, I'm wondering sort of what you do. Are you there more observing, or are they actually listening to you, the voices of the next generation, the people who will be, taking over the planet that they're trying to protect? What exactly do the youth delegates do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do a few different things. One of the main bodies through which we advocate in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, or at the COP24, is under YOUNGO, which is the youth constituency of the UNFCCC. And we do lobbying processes through that body, but we also meet with our own ministers. So we meet with, we recently met with George Hayman, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for British Columbia. And we meet with some other Canadian delegates, both negotiators and MPs who attend the conference and can actively share the concerns of youth to them.
And how do you feel, you add on to that, if you would, Alice, I'm wondering if they are aware, if they're open to your input, to your ideas as you look to the future?
I think to an extent they are willing to listen in terms of open to our ideas. I mean, I think we're here to we're here to really put them to the standard in which we would like to see them at.
Yeah.
And so we're here to really advocate for the youth and to make sure there are better emission reduction targets set within Canada and just generally better climate action. And so whether or not they're open to our ideas, I think it's independent from the fact that we will advocate for better climate action.
Okay. It's interesting because some of the other things, the comments that I've been reading from other youth delegates like yourselves, there is just a tremendous level of frustration by the stasis, that there's nothing being done. People, a call for action, calling for boycotts, calling for, walkouts and that sort of more dramatic action because people of your generation are increasingly frustrated by summits like this.
Yeah. Absolutely, I can see that, but I also wonder whether or not there is a productivity in staying persistent and staying kind of holding them accountable to what they should be doing. And I think there's different methods in which you could do that, whether that's a more kind of not necessarily radical, but more of like protest-like approach, or kind of engaging within the negotiations, engaging with conversation to try to see if there's points in which you can influence.
And both are critically needed.
Yeah.
Youth need to be battling on all fronts, and our goal is to continue to advocate to the Canadian government that they increase their ambition, because right now, not only Canada, but all countries, we're not on track to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius, and we know that that goal is essential for especially vulnerable, low-lying island states, for instance, who are facing immediate threat from coastal erosion, rising sea levels, and other things. So we're calling on the urgency for the Canadian government to act and for others to act absolutely as well.
It's so interesting. So obviously you're going to continue your engagement even when this comes to an end, whenever it does. But you mentioned you're dealing with Canadian officials, government officials. You're talking with fellow youth delegates. I'm just wondering what Canada's image is there, because Canada arrives there as a major emitter in the world, but also a country that's trying to take climate change action, carbon taxes and carbon pricing and everything, and the minister has been speaking. As you deal with the young people there, what do they think about Canada and its climate change stance?
That's a really good question. So I think in terms of the internationally and globally, Canada is looked to as a leader in climate action and as a facilitator of consensus building, particularly in the negotiation process. And they've been taking a leadership role both in the negotiations as well as in the ministerial portions of the last 2 weeks. And so they have put a lot of effort and a lot of work towards this. But what I find interesting is the image that Canada has in the global, internationally, and the leadership that Canada takes on the global stage, and it may or may not be reflected internally. And so I think as youth, we're trying to advocate for Canada to walk the talk, to make sure that the leadership that they're taking on the global stage is equivalent to the leadership in climate action that they're taking at home as well.
Yeah. Want to add to that, Colton, last word?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last word then, the most recent numbers that are being talked about, I mean, if we need to get to 1.5, Canada needs to double its emissions reductions targets. We're talking about 60% below 2005 levels. And I think Canada's playing an excellent role in facilitating conversation at these negotiations, but they need to step up even more than we're already doing domestically, because we're not doing enough right now.
So great to hear your voices on this. Thank you for the time, and I hope they're listening to your voices over there as they make decisions for the future for all of us. Thank you very much. Our Canadian youth delegates, a couple of them attending COP24, Colton, Kasteel, Alice Guo in Poland this morning. Thanks again.